Hello, I'm Susan Dunlop and welcome to episode 25 of Coffee and Contemplation with Susan. The podcast is about authentic guests sharing stories, how they've embraced both the shadows and the light that results from life experiences, vulnerabilities, successes, and giving insights, hope, and maybe a smile to the women and men listening to the podcast. It's being listened to in Australia, the USA, Canada, Ireland, and Russia, from what I've heard, and it's broadcast across 8 platforms. I'm a life coach and I'm here in Noosa. I began the podcast back in February this year, intrigued by so many stories I hear in coaching. Now, our brains are literally boxes full of stories. And like everything to me, why keep things in a box or a cupboard or on a shelf when it can be given or shared for the benefit of yourself or for others? So by way of preparation, I share a great long list of questions with each guest after I've had a first chat with them for them to contemplate and choose from. And that seems to have benefited a lot of the guests. They've said so far that it might be ones that they enjoy contemplating and answering, or that help ease the chat along a particular message or theme they want to share, or it could be just something that's outside the square. So today's guest was a referral by a previous guest, by Megan Delton, who was on only a few episodes ago. And that's very exciting to get a referral. And I can understand why, having had the opportunity to meet and chat with her this past week. So this week's guest is Ann Harrap from here in Noosa. Welcome to the podcast, Ann.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks for having me.
Hey, no, it's lovely to get to have our bigger chat today. So what I was thinking I was doing, I might just do a little intro because a lot of what we're going to cover is part of the episode itself. So what I was just going to say is when Ann and I got to meet over the phone last week, she asked, what do I know about her? And I thought, only what Megan Delton said, that you're an inspiring guest to have on the podcast with a very good heart. So I thought, that's intriguing. So we had a chat further and I got to learn that by way of a brief background, Ann was Australia's first female High Commissioner to South Africa and also Botswana, Mozambique, Namibia, Swaziland, Lesotho, and the ambassador to Angola. In 2013, Ann retired from foreign affairs and she established her own consultancy centred around leadership and diplomacy, training and workshops. But Ann is here now in Noosa. She's had a sea change, as we all do, and she's been the former member of the board of the trustees of Brisbane Girls Grammar School, and she's currently sharing herself and her time as the president of the board of Noosa Care in Tewantin and up at Karoi. So back in those days, when that was what Ann's role was, I wouldn't have just said, welcome to the podcast, Ann. It would have been more appropriate for me to say, welcome to the podcast, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much.
We're not so formal right now, though, so we'll stick with Ann today. But I think, Ann, how about we, with that, I mean, it's intriguing to me because obviously I've never actually come across someone who's the first female High Commissioner, that we talk about that. And how did you get started on that journey to become that in that role in South Africa? What does that all mean? So if you could share some of that with us.
Sure. So I did arts law at university and I was always going to be a journalist. But I took a year off after I'd finished my degrees and I went hitchhiking in Africa, which is obviously not something I advocate that young women do these days, but it was the 90s and a different time. And I was standing on the side of the road just outside of Cape Town and I was picked up by an Australian diplomat. And I went and lived at her house for a couple of days. And, of course, as you do, you get talking, or what is it that a diplomat does? And I realised actually there are a lot of similarities between diplomacy and journalism. So you need to be curious and be interested in people, like to ask questions, like to tell a story. And so when I'd finished my backpacking, I came back to Australia and I applied for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade because that's where most of our diplomats come from, that public service department. And it takes a little while to go through the whole process because you've got to do lots of security interviews and general knowledge exams and international relations tests. But after that process, I was accepted as one of the graduates and I joined the department in 1992. And then my first posting as a junior diplomat was actually back to South Africa, and I ended up living in the house that I'd stayed in as a backpacker a couple of years earlier. And then sort of over the next 15 years or so, I had overseas postings in London, in the UK, in Iraq, in Papua New Guinea. And then, as you said, in 2008, I was posted as Australia's first female High Commissioner to South Africa and those 6 other Southern African countries. And of course, having spent so much time there over my life, it was interesting for me to go back in that more senior role and see how much had changed and I guess how much hadn't.
Okay, yeah. And was it a risky type of position to be in terms of personal risk?
Oh, I mean, it is a high risk security environment, but you get trained in how to manage that, and obviously we don't put Australian officials at risk without taking appropriate measures. So I never challenged in any way by that, but you had to be sensible and take sensible precautions.
Yeah. Was there any, what would you call pinch me moments that you had in the time in your role?
Well, I mean, I've been incredibly privileged and lucky to have met some amazing, interesting people in my life in some stunning, beautiful locations. So when you wake up at Richard Branson's Game Lodge in South Africa and you're looking out over the plains at rhino and giraffe, and then you go and have lunch with the man himself, that's pretty special. But
Oh, wow.
But I think there are actually probably 2 pinch me moments that come to mind. And the first was meeting Nelson Mandela. And I was very lucky to actually have met him twice in my career. And the first time was actually when I was a junior diplomat. And South Africa had just passed their first ever democratic constitution, and the South African government was hosting a reception to say thank you to the international community. And for some reason, the High Commissioner couldn't go, and so I was representing Australia at that function. And President Mandela was walking down the line of ambassadors and High Commissioners and stopping and greeting everybody and shaking their hands. And of course, they were all saying, "Oh, congratulations on the passing of the Constitution." And of course, I'm thinking, come up with something original to say, be creative. And of course, I could think of nothing. So I said exactly the same thing that everybody else had said: congratulations on the passing of the Constitution. And he looked at me as if that was the most interesting thing he had heard all night, as if I was the only person to have come up with something so interesting, as if I was the only person in the room. He just made me feel really special, and from then on, I would have done anything for him. And it was a real lesson for me in terms of how to take someone with you on your journey. Is you make them feel part of that journey and you make them feel special, and he certainly did. So that's a pretty pinch me moment. And I guess the second one was observing South Africa's first democratic elections in 1994, and I think I still pinch myself about that, particularly at a time when we're having lots of elections around the world in democracy. So in the US, here in Queensland, ours coming up soon. And, we moan about the fact that we've got to go and vote, and we whinge about the quality of the candidates and the standard of political debate and all of those sorts of things. And yet in 1994, I watched Black South Africans stand in queues for hours, for days, in order to be able to exercise their vote for the very first time. So I think we take it for granted and we forget the value of our democratic choice. Whereas for many South Africans at that time, it had been a matter of life and death. And so, each time I go and vote, I reflect on that and I pinch myself about it.
Yeah, that right, isn't it? That we maybe do take for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose we've never been in a situation, or for many of us, we've never been in the sort of situation where we have to fight for it. And I just feel incredibly lucky that we don't have to. But but to have seen just the dignity with which those South Africans approached that choice that had taken so long to win, I guess, was pretty special.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. Were there any great achievements that you had, the most important to you, say, from the time in all those years that you were the High Commissioner?
I think if I was doing this as a television interview or for promotion, I'd highlight a lot of professional achievements like, advancing Australia's business and investment interests in a way that helped the Australian economy, or securing 7 votes when Australia made a bid for the UN Security Council, getting those 7 African countries to vote for us, or helping to secure or provide a safe environment for the thousands of Australians who came to South Africa to watch the 2010 Soccer World Cup. I guess I'd highlight all of those, but if I actually think about what was most important to me during my time there, I would say the work that we did to assist our locally engaged staff, so our South African employees, many of whom came from disadvantaged backgrounds. They were the sole breadwinner in often large extended families, and just to sort of see the impact on their lives through the education and employment opportunities that we were able to provide for them was pretty special. I remember one fellow in particular, his name was Leonard, and I first met him when he was a waiter, but he was engaging and gregarious, and so we asked him to apply for the position of household manager at the official residence, because as you can imagine, you actually have to hold lots of events and lots of functions and lots of lunches in order to advocate for Australia's interests. And so to have someone who was able to organise all of that, and he applied for the job and got it, and I can assure you he organised me within an inch of my life over sort of the next few months. But then a second position came up as the High Commissioner's driver. And again, we needed someone with discretion and integrity and who was organised, and Leonard applied for that and he got the job easily. And then there was a position of administrative clerk at the High Commission, and again, Leonard applied for that and got it. And I think about the impact that those promotions had on him as a person. He became much more self-confident and outgoing. I mean, he was gregarious anyway, but just his level of personal confidence really changed, and the impact obviously on his family, and to see that. So all those professional things are important to me, sure, but to have just seen the change that we were able to make in the lives of our staff, that was very special.
And thinking in that, like I always talk about the ripple effect. So it wouldn't have just been a ripple out as far as his own family. That would have gone out quite a fair way into his community, wouldn't it, for him to have been in that position?
Oh, absolutely. Because as I said, a lot of them did come from disadvantaged backgrounds. So in their communities, they might have been the only person that had a regular full-time job. And so obviously, it's a pretty tough gig for a lot of them, because they're having to watch what happens to their money, because there's a lot of people with a demand on that. But it was more about, the status that they could have in the community, the way in which others came and looked up to them or sought their advice, or, spoke to them about addressing some of their own challenges. And I think someone like Leonard was absolutely able to do that in his own community.
Yeah. And just even the impact, I think even further, so it gives you a bit goosebumps, doesn't it? Like the impact it would have had on the youth of their community to see that was something that was possible to achieve.
Yeah, something to aspire to, because, the youth unemployment, certainly back then, and I know it's pretty similar now in South Africa, is well over 60%. So, to have role models in the community is something that's really important for South African youth, and people like Leonard are able to provide that, able to demonstrate what can happen if you apply yourself, if you if you give a commitment to an employer, those sorts of things. I think it was really, very important.
Yeah, it's a bit of the who are the people in your neighbourhood sort of scenario, isn't it? Even, you said me coming across you just by having spoken to Megan and Megan then mentioning your name, that, we don't realise that, you are in our community. So, and you've been a role model in terms of your board position that you had with the school, with the girls. I know that you talked about that, about, talking to them about, what is it they actually want to achieve and what they're going to do, isn't it, more so with what their status is?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's important for those of us who've had experiences or have some professional expertise that we're able to share to help others, that we do that. One of the things people often say, well, what advice would you give to young girls or young people, and particularly at times of crisis or of challenge? And I would say, well, actually think about all the people that are in your networks, in your communities. What other resources can you draw on? I mean, I've spent my whole professional career building coalitions, establishing connections so that you can exert influence and achieve a particular outcome. But I think it's also a useful exercise in one's personal life as well too, because there are very few things in life that you should do by yourself or that you need to do by yourself. And so, particularly for young people, reflect on the fact that there's probably someone who's been there before you and tried that and might have been a success or might have been a failure or have some ideas about how you can address particular challenges. But reach out. Don't be afraid to sort of ask the question. And I suppose that's how I try to be giving back now, is to be able to offer that to people who are interested.
Yes, see all the resources that are out there. They are there, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, before we finish up on what you were talking about in terms of your title, were there any common myths or comments that you heard that make you smile or make you shake your head about having had that position with such title?
Well, I think everybody thinks when they hear High Commissioner or Diplomat, they just think cocktail parties. That's all we do, and there are a lot of cocktail parties, I can assure you. But I think if people knew how much hard work they are, because you're always working the room, you're always trying to get an outcome, and in fact how boring many of them are, they wouldn't be envious about it at all. But I also think there's a bit of a misperception out there that you need a title. You need a title like High Commissioner or Prime Minister or School Captain in order to actually be able to make a contribution to your community or to your society. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be ambitious, and if you aspire to those titled positions, then go for it. But it's not everybody, and I think what people need to appreciate is that leadership isn't about a label. It's about the choices that we make, and you can be a leader from any position in your family, in your community, in broader society. And I see people every day who are weighing up information and making decisions that have financial implications, where there's a cost and a benefit, where it will impact on somebody else's life, and that's equally as important whether you're carrying a label or a title than whether you're not. I don't know if we've got some time. Perhaps I could just share a story.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
When my husband and I finished up in South Africa, we came back to Noosa, and he bought a management rights business at an accommodation complex, and I was helping him one day by sweeping the front driveway. And then this car pulled up with a family all ready to check in, and I looked in the window, and the driver was Darren Lehman, the former coach of the Australian cricket team. And I looked at him and I thought, the first time I had greeted Darren Lehman was off the Qantas flight with the rest of the Australian cricket team in South Africa. They'd come back to the official residence. We had one of those cocktail receptions. We'd made lots of nice speeches about one another, and here I was greeting him again a second time, but this time with a broom in my hand. And I thought, how far have I come? And I guess some people would say, well, not very far. And in fact, you've gone backwards because no one does call you Your Excellency anymore. And now you sweep the driveway. And I would argue exactly the opposite, that now I'm making different memories and I'm having an impact on different people's lives in different ways. So since retiring, I've been a carer for my mum before she passed away. I'm a member of Red Cross, worked with the girls at the school, volunteer at Noosa Care, and for me those contributions are no less valid or valuable just because I no longer have the title of High Commissioner.
Oh, for sure. And that's the thing. Yes, that you were giving your all in relation to what you and your husband were making a go of in terms of that position. So, we've all got to pick up a broom or stand on a stage and give a speech. It doesn't matter. You go up and you go down, but that all becomes that lovely, rich tapestry of what your life has been made up of then. So
that's right, and imagine if you're just creating the same memories all the time. So for me, this is a whole new experience, and you draw on your experience from the past, but you use that then to create a new future. That's
right. Yeah. Did he recognise you when he got out of the car?
He did after a while. I smiled and reminded him the last time I'd seen him.
I was just thinking in terms of, I'm a bit into what do you call it, quotes and whatnot. And there's that saying attributed to Audrey Hepburn, and it came up to me after I'd spoken to you initially the other day, that as you grow older, you will discover that you have two hands, one for helping yourself and the other for helping others. So now, Anne, you're contributing to society in a different way. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing now with Noosa Care?
I really like that quote from Audrey Hepburn. In fact, I hadn't heard it before you sent it to me. But the reason I like it is because there's that acknowledgement of doing something for yourself with the one hand. Because I think, sometimes then, particularly when you're younger and you're at the height of sort of your professional career, perhaps you forget to do that and forget the importance of emotional nourishment and protecting your own mental health. So I really like the acknowledgement of that. And then, yes, as you say, that the other hand being able to give back. And certainly for me, because I do feel very privileged, I had an excellent education, I've had these amazing professional opportunities, and now I've got the time and the opportunity to be able to give that back. And the primary way in which I'm doing it now is through Noosa Care. And, it's a not-for-profit community organisation that's very focused on guaranteeing dignity and quality of life for older Australians living in our community, and particularly those living with dementia. And so making sure we create a quality residential experience for the 225 people that call Noosa Care home is something that's very important to me, and I'm really proud to be part of it. And if I can give a little bit back and share the knowledge, as we were talking about before, then I'm really happy to do that.
I'm just thinking in terms of that, and I didn't ask you this question, but you sitting there, you're there as the president of the board, so you obviously would hear stories of lovely things that are happening, and particularly during COVID-19. Is there anything that stands out to you that say maybe is a goosebump type feeling that you think, oh my gosh, this is just amazing to be part of?
Well, I think obviously at the height of the crisis, we took a very cautious and conservative approach, as did many aged care facilities, in relation to visitors actually coming on site. So how do you ensure that residents don't then feel isolated and unable to communicate with loved ones? And I think just some of the experiences with new technologies, shall I say, were quite amusing, but also quite lovely. And we obviously used iPads and Skype and Zoom and all of those sorts of things. But the residents also at one stage did up these lovely signs where they just sent messages to their loved ones, and then we were able to photograph those signs and email them out to their family members. And that was pretty special, because they really showed us, I think, what resilience means. For many of them, they've been through lots of things in their life, and they approached COVID with the same resilience, the same stoicism, and to sort of see the way they coped with it was admirable. It was really amazing.
Yeah, and you did mention that's what made it come to mind. You said that someone said at the AGM about it, the sense of community and new family. That was it a resident or someone's partner that said that?
No, someone's partner whose spouse had just joined us at Caramar in Cartwright Lodge, which is for people living with dementia. And obviously it's an incredibly stressful time if you have to put your family member into a different sort of environment. And I think it was just such a lovely comment for him to make, because he participated in that AGM, and at the end of it, he felt that he'd found a new family, found a new community to be part of, and was very complimentary about the care that his wife was receiving. But I think the thing that I found special was the fact that he felt able to relate and to connect and be part of the Noosa Care family.
Yeah, because I think that's the thing. A lot of the time we talk about aged care in terms of how the people will feel about actually being moved into aged care, but it's actually that person that's now him at home for the first time without his wife in the home, and without maybe some of that pressure too of obviously doing what he was trying to attempt to do. But he's now alone, living in his own house, isn't he? So it's nice for him to have that connection.
It's a huge challenge, and of course at a time like we're in now with COVID, where transitions are not as easy as they've been in the past, where sometimes the arrangements are a little bit more strict, then I think that transition is even more difficult. But we try to make Noosa Care a family home place. I mean, most people want to spend their final years at home. We absolutely understand that, and that is what we should be focusing on as a society, in my view. But there is still a requirement or a need for residential aged care facilities, but you want to make them as comfortable and as home-like and as like the environment from which you've come as you can.
And that's probably the beauty about the two locations you have, is, they've been around for quite a while, but they definitely have that sense of the environment and the outdoor space where you are situated.
Oh yeah, and so our model is to have lodge-like living, so villas with 8 residents in each, rather than sort of multi-storey large complexes. And yes, we're very lucky with the natural landscape where people can walk in the gardens, and particularly people living with dementia. There's a lot of research about the value of the natural environment in terms of stimulating memories, creating a calmness, and so for us, I mean, we're lucky, but we also put a lot of effort into ensuring that that's part of what we offer at Noosa Care.
Yeah, it's beautiful. You know what? We actually are at half an hour. How did that happen? I told you to go quick. So just before we wrap up, I always ask, have you got a favourite mantra or affirmation or quote that gets you through hard times?
I do, and it's a quote that sits in a frame next to my bed, and my dad gave it to me in that frame when I was about 12, and I've kept it with me all that time. And it's attributable to Calvin Coolidge, who was US president in the 20s, and it reads, "Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent." You can tell it's a quote from the 20s. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. The slogan "Press on" has solved and always will solve the problems of the human race. And I loved it when I was younger because it had that big word omnipotent in it, and I had no idea what that was. But I love it now because, yeah, for me, it's just about giving it a go. And sometimes things don't turn out the way you plan, or they go in a different direction, but you just got to keep having a go at it.
Yeah, wow, what a beautiful quote to be handed when you're only 12 years old.
Yeah. Well, sorry, I know we're out of time, but let me tell you why he gave it to me. So I was swimming in the regional swimming championships and in breaststroke, and I did this time, and it was exactly the same time as another girl in a different heat. And of course, only 8 people can go through to the final. And so there were the 2 of us with exactly the same time, the 8th fastest time. So the way the officials worked out who would go through to the final was they tossed a coin, and I lost. So I didn't swim in the final. Well, I was inconsolable, crying my eyes out, all the rest of it. And Dad gave me that quote, and he basically just said, well, A, you still have to go to swimming training, but B, the moral of the story is, well, you just back it right up. You come back next time and you swim the 7th fastest time or the 1st fastest time. And it's been a very inspirational thing for me over my career.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. So what song would be your favourite sing out loud song?
I would say "These Days" by Powderfinger.
Okay.
It's got this great line in there, "These days turned out nothing like I had planned." I mean, it's a great sort of beat song, but I also really like the lyrics of it as well too, because while I like the idea of goal setting and having a sense of the direction that your life will take, I think it's also important to recognise that things often don't turn out the way you planned, and you need to be flexible and adaptable and resilient, because the way in which you cope with challenges or things that aren't going according to plan is actually what will define you. So if I think I was always going to be a journalist, I ended up being a diplomat. Like everybody, I thought I would marry young and have kids. I married later in life and wasn't fortunate enough to be able to have children. I was a high-flying Australian diplomat. Now I volunteer in my local community. Not quite what I had planned, but certainly no regrets about it. And I think that's why I love that song, and I sing it out loud, because sometimes things don't turn out the way you plan, and you just have to roll with that.
Yeah, and it's just that map. Your map sort of unrolls in front of you, doesn't it? That you just, you might have to go left or right, and how's that going to turn out for you?
That's right. And you can sort of make a plan that you're going to go left, and if you can go left, great, do it. But sometimes you might have to go the other way, and then how you cope with that's who you become.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's lovely. So I think Megan and you would not be safe in a convertible, because both of you like Powderfinger, very loud, if you know Megan. So if I hear Powderfinger blaring, I'll know it's you two coming past from Carramar to to get a coffee at Tewantin.
Excellent. I didn't know she'd said Powderfinger, so I'll follow that up with her.
Yeah, no, she said it's from the time she leaves the facility all the way home. It's Powderfinger. So
fantastic. Yeah, I mean they've got a great rock beat, let alone the lyrics that also I find very inspiring.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you, Anne, just once again. It's been a pleasure having you share your story, and that was just so easy as always. To everyone I've had come on, it's just you're all just amazing women. You just like I really appreciate you've had this time today, and even though we had a technical glitch earlier, we got through.
Yeah, no, sorry, I really didn't mean to muck you around this morning. Usually I'm quite good with technology, but yeah, no, it was lovely chatting to you. And you sort of, you asked me to choose questions that would make me reflect a little bit, and I found it a really interesting exercise, particularly that quote. Why do I like that quote? And I told my husband that story about the swimming for the first time. I'd never sort of actually told him that, but so no, I appreciate the just the opportunity to do some contemplation and some reflection.
Yeah, I think it's something that we don't really spend much time on for ourselves. I mean, we do try to say journal or whatever, but it was actually nice now that as I'm sort of moving through this podcast series, I'm getting to understand a person first and then go, oh, what would I like to actually explore and see? And it's interesting always to see what questions people choose and what questions they don't choose. So I'll have you back another time so you can choose the other questions. Okay.
Yes. There are a few there where I was like, no, don't want to do that one.
No. There's only so much time.
But in a way, actually, that's, why don't I want to do it? And so, yeah, to sort of reflect on that is also an interesting thing as well.
I think so. So to me, I just wanted to say, as I said, I've said thank you, and this will go. Well, obviously, this will be this week's episode, and I'll publish it tonight. So I just also want to thank the listeners for joining us today, and maybe have a think about what are your key takeaways you got from Anne's episode today. Maybe even something you can relate to. Now, and I'd love to hear. There's apparently a comments point in anchor.fm where I publish it up front. But to me, it's about stories shared are better than stories stashed away. And, we grow and develop through storytelling. And I see every day that stories shared are an important part of the process of transforming hearts as well as minds. So just keep growing and developing until next episode. And I really appreciate everyone's time in taking the opportunity to listen today. So thank you, Anne, and thank you everyone else for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.